And welcome once more to Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. Joining me as always is Juan Zarate, our national security analyst. Juan, good to see you.
Bob, great to see you.
Okay, let's talk about the Ukraine and what's going on there now. So Crimea is essentially gone.
Yeah.
Russian President Putin has come out to kind of make what looked like a victory speech.
Yeah.
So where are we?
Well, certainly the Russian flag flies over Crimea now, and Russia is annexing Crimea after the referendum. But I think the question now is, does Russia want more? And what happens next? And I think the concerning signals here come from the military buildup along the Ukrainian border. Concern all along, as you know, Bob, has been not just what happens in Crimea, but what happens potentially in eastern Ukraine, where you also have Russian-speaking, Russian-leaning communities. And does President Putin take this as a moment not just of weakness on the part of the government in Kiev, but on the part of the West, to start to influence further and perhaps to take more territory? And again, as Secretary Kerry said, this starts to feel a little bit like 20th century geopolitics with the movement of forces and the taking of land. But that's really the consideration at this point with Russian troops at the border of Ukraine. And you have to ask, is Putin just playing for influence and pressure, or is he actually going for the jugular here?
Now, Putin came out and expressly said, we're not interested in more territory, more annexation, Crimea, that's it. But then those are the words. Then the posture is big military buildup.
Right.
And David Martin, our Pentagon correspondent, says this looks a little ominous. It's more than twice as much as what Russia initially said it was going to do.
Right, and I think with Russia at this point, you have to see what they do and not necessarily believe what they say. I think the reality here, and keep in mind that President Putin for a while before the referendum in Crimea was saying that Russian forces weren't even in Crimea, right? And so you have to discount what's coming out of Moscow officially and watch what's happening on the ground. And I think the ominous part here, in particular for the fragile government in Kiev, is, do you have Russia really being even more aggressive? And, you know, you have the troops at the border, but you also have the question of, is Russia going to undermine Ukrainian politics and society and governance moving forward? And, you know, the line here all along is that Putin and Russia are playing for influence in a volatile situation in Kiev. But I think the real question now is Putin going for more? And I think that really is concerning military officials as well as the statesmen.
Let's talk about the strategy in checking Putin's motives here, or his next move. The U.S. and allies have condemned this. They basically have called Putin out. They've traded some sanctions. Is that having any effect at all? I mean, the strategy put forward by the U.S. and the Brits and others.
Yeah, you basically have three parts to that strategy. One is attempt at diplomatic isolation. Things like, look, you're not going to be part of the G8 anymore. You're not going to host the leaders in Sochi coming up. So there's diplomatic isolation, limited effect. You have economic sanctions and financial influence. That has started to ratchet up. You've seen the opening salvos of that, and I think it's going to start to hurt, but that's a longer-term venture. That's not going to roll back troops tomorrow or the next day. Finally, you have the military maneuvers, things like moving fighters into Poland, having NATO officials go to the Baltics to try to reinforce a sense that NATO is going to be there, and in fact, there's going to be support for the government in Kiev if something further happens. That, who knows if that's going to have a deterrent effect, but if there isn't a sense that there's going to be pushback if Russia crosses another line here, the border into eastern Ukraine, I'm not sure that there's much that will stop Russia in the near term, because the costs being imposed on Putin are not high enough yet.
I mean, for now, it just seems that President Putin's thumbing his nose at everybody.
Well,
I'm having it my way.
Absolutely his way. I mean, he's willing to fight for what he perceives to be Russian interests, and part of the annexation of Crimea is getting that back, part of the Russian polity, and he has the first mover advantage. Everyone is reacting to what he's doing, and his calculus, frankly, hasn't changed yet.
There's more to watch on this. We'll be looking at it going forward. Juan, thanks as always.
Thank you, Bob.
And thanks to you for watching Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. We'll see you next time.